Welcome to you and yours, wherever you at, wherever you are. I hope you are being appreciated and never tolerated. I hope you're somewhere being loved on. I hope you're somewhere being great. My name is Ken Billions. If you didn't know, if this is our first time meeting, welcome. If you're coming back and you keep coming back, I appreciate you because the work can't go on without you. Shout out to you. If you can see me, press one. And if you can hear me, press two. If you can see me, press one. And if you can hear me, press two. Welcome to Heaven on Earth, the number one home for personal development. This is ministry for the abstract mind, and it's a safe space for men and women, boys and girls, young and old, that have an out the box philosophy. At Heaven on Earth, we don't believe that you have to die in order to go to heaven. All you have to do is be real, reflective, enlightened, accountable, most importantly, limitless. I have a great conversation today, but before I get into that, I always make a promise to you, and I need help to keep that promise. My promise to you is that personal development is for everybody. No matter how bleak it looks outside, personal development is for everybody. No matter what happens with Project 2025, personal development is for everybody. No matter what happens during the election cycle, personal development is for everybody. Don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. No matter where you are, personal development is for you. Personal development trumps colorism. Personal development, believe it or not, can even trump people being racist against you or discriminated against you or hating on you, right? Man or woman, no matter what, personal development is for everybody. Keep your babies close to you and be patient. Please be patient, especially now with things that are going on in the world, with people that are in your circle trying to love on you. This family thing, this love thing, this relationship thing, it doesn't come with a manual. So be easy on each other. Thoth. Have any of you ever heard of Thoth? Thoth has other names like Hermes Trismegistus. He is credited to be the author of a philosophical system known as Hermeticism. Thoth was a master at combining the material world and the spiritual world, blending these two extremes, the material and the spiritual. It is said that Hermeticism has 7 principles, right? Mentalism, polarity, correspondence, rhythm, vibration, cause and effect, and gender. These 7 principles are put into a collection of concepts and ideals called the Kabbalion. Many of you have heard me read the Kabbalion. I've encouraged others to get the Kabbalion because it deals with how to look at the world. So Thoth is credited for that. And all these principles are phenomenal. But I want to focus on one principle today in this opening. And I want to focus that on polarity. Polarity is interesting because polarity says everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. Let me read that again because polarity really is driving me crazy because of the subject matter that I'm going to talk about today. Everything is dual, everything has its poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The reason why I struggle with polarity is because if everything has its opposite pole, if everything has another side, then how can white supremacy exist? Because what's the other side of it? If everything has an opposite, right? Then explain the ideal and the concept of white supremacy because it stands alone with no opposite. And if this is true, then it is the only thing that stands without its opposite pole. There is no brown supremacy. There is no black supremacy. So if white supremacy is real, then it supersedes the concept of polarity because polarity says that everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Everything have its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Well, where's white supremacy's opposite? And we repeat it and we believe in it, but it defies spirituality. It defies the Kabbalion. It defies the ideal left, right, up, down, in, out, wet, dry. Everything has an opposite except white supremacy. And if that's true, then it really is supreme. If that's true, we're in trouble. Because if this thing has no opposite, then what we think about it, it really is that. It's more supreme than nature. It's more supreme than ancestry. It's more supreme than all ancient spiritual concepts because it is the only thing that is standalone and doesn't have an opposite. My conversation today, our conversation today, is why white supremacy is a myth. Words really hack the world. Our conversation today, let me get my Umar Johnson on. Our conversation today is why white supremacy is a myth, how words really hack the world. White supremacy is extremely unique because it is standalone and it has no opposites. Today is a conversation about belief. Today is a conversation about the power of language. Not only are thoughts things, language is a real thing. That language has a structure to it. And when we talk, we code, right? We code our environment with language. Language can change your state. It can elevate you and it can lower you. The term white supremacy is proof that language hacks the world that we live in. We're gonna do some reading today. Today is a getting your academic bag Thursday. Today is we gonna do some reading Thursday. Today is things that make you go Thursday. And that's good for you, right? Because everything is microwave. So you need to be in an environment where you sit and you read and you sit and you think and you get your mind going just for a second. You can get back to the fuckery later. I promise you. There's going to be somebody beefing online. Somebody's going to get exposed. They're going to talk about Ronnie James. I promise you. But for right now, let's open up your nerd bag because some of you haven't been there in a minute. So today is a conversation about belief, power of it, language, words, right? And how this software that of language programs this entire environment. All right? So before I get into it, I appreciate you coming through, dropping that on me. Salute to you. Uh, and I never left. I'm here. I just be in the cut doing the work. You know what I'm saying? Uh, I believe you got to step away from the microphone. There's no way people could go live every day and learning and they're getting anyway, right? So I want to start somewhere. I want to start with the Virginia colony, the birth of the British Empire, right? Let's start with the Virginia colony, because Virginia really gets a lot of things in motion that are new to the human family, right? So we're going to start in Virginia. 1497, John Cobart's voyage to establish England's claim to new territory. 1604, King James prepares to colonize North America. 1606, King James issues charter for creating a new colony. Virginia Company is created. 1607, 3 small ships sailed from England as Virginia's to set up Virginia's first colonies. Something interesting happens though. We're going to start with a gentleman named John Punch. Matter of fact, before we do that, we got to lay the groundwork before we get to John Punch. We got to lay the groundwork before we get to John Punch. So we're going to do some reading. Before we get to John Punch, we need to know how we got here, why we say white supremacy and what is whiteness, because it's an invention. Tim Wise talks about this. Many other scholars talk about this, right? And when we look in the past, we have to look at it the right way. We look at how we are now and assume that the world has always been like this, but it has not. The identifications of white and black are new. If you travel to the past and go to Africa and call those people black, they're not going to know what the hell you're talking about. If you go to the Americas and call those people red, they're not going to know what you're talking about, because ancient people were known by their geological locations. They were known by their clans and their tribes. They weren't known by their skin. Okay? In terms of humanity, this is new. Okay? Remember, I said this is a conversation about belief. So we're going to do a little reading. I'll post this article in the chat too, so you can go back to it and check it out. If you ask an Englishman in the early part of the 17th century what color skin he had, he might very well have called it white. But the whiteness of his skin would have suggested no more suitable basis for a collective identity than the roundness of his nose and the baldness of his head. If you ask him to situate himself with the rapidly expansion borders of the known world, he would probably identify himself first and most naturally as an Englishman. Okay, location. If the category proved too narrow, if, say, he needed to describe what he had in common with the French and the Dutch that he did not share with the Ottomans or Africans, he would almost certainly call himself a Christian instead. You're going to see religion come up a lot in this conversation. And I'm going to put something on the table that if you're melanated, I'm going to make you wrestle with Christianity. You're going to have to wrestle with it. Despite Granny giving it to you, despite what you believe, I'm going to put some historical things in your lap and let you wrestle with it. And I'm going to drill it in a way that you're going to have to do cognitive dissonance. I'm going to make you do cognitive dissonance to accept what you believe about your faith. You're going to have to say, well, I don't care. I just know, right? I'm going to make you do that. The religious identity was crucial for the development of the English slave trade and eventually for the development of racial whiteness. In the early 17th century, plantation owners in the West Indies and the American colonies largely depended on labor of European indentured servants. These servants were considered chattel and were often treated brutally. The conditions on Barbados, England's wealthiest colony, were notorious, but they were fortunate in at least one respect because they were Christian by law. They could not be held in lifetime captivity unless they were criminals or prisoners of war. Africans enjoyed no such privileges. They were understood to be infidels and thus perpetual enemies of Christian nations, which made it legal to hold them as slaves. By 1640 or so, the rough treatment of indentured servants had started to diminish the supply of Europeans willing to work on the sugar and tobacco plantations. And so the colonists looked increasingly to slavery and the Atlantic-sized loophole that enabled it to keep their fantastically profitable operations supplied with labor. Reading comprehension is super important. Let's go right here. Let's check this out. Peep this. Okay. These servants were considered, they're talking about European servants. These servants were considered chattel and were often treated brutally. The conditions on Barbados, English wealthiest colony, were notorious, but they were fortunate in at least one respect because they were Christian. They're talking about Europeans. They were Christian by law. They cannot be held in lifetime captivities unless they were criminals or prisoners of war. Africans enjoyed no such privilege. They were understood to be infidels and thus the perpetual enemies of Christian nations, which made it legal to hold them as slaves. Now, as a believer, if you identify as FBA, black, whatever, as a believer, what you have to wrestle with is that upon contact with European nations, you weren't Christian. If you believe in ancestry, right? If you adhere to your ancient mothers and fathers, right? Now, if you're going to do your own thing, that's fine. But you have to give up ancestor worship because your ancestors, if you were melanated, when they had contact with the Portuguese, French, Dutch, the English, and the Spanish, they were considered infidels. Europe did not see them as Christian because they weren't. Okay? That's not opinion. That's a fact. Before there was ever an ideal of white supremacy, there was religious supremacy. All right? So a European indentured servant could not be held in lifetime captivity unless he was a prisoner of war or committed a crime. However, an African or native could just because they weren't Christian. Okay? So if you are a believer, which is fine, you can do you. Just understand that is not what your ancestors did. Okay? So you have to split from reverence of your ancestors and kind of just erase them from history and do your own thing. Because Christianity to them was an act of war. And the only time they accepted it willingly was to get the status of a European. Right? Okay. By 1640 or so, the rough treatment of indentured servants had started to diminish the supply of Europeans willing to work on the sugar and tobacco plantations. And so the colonists looked increasingly to slavery and the Atlantic-sized loophole and enabled it to keep their fantastically profitable operations supplied with labor. This is more based on the fact that they are non-Christian than they're black. That comes later. Plantation owners understood very well that their cruel treatment of indentured Europeans and their even crueler treatment of enslaved Africans might lead to thoughts or worse of vengeance. Significantly outnumbered, they lived in constant fear of uprisings. They were particularly afraid of incidents such as Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, which saw indentured servants and European fighting side by side with free and enslaved Africans against Virginia's colonial government. Bacon's Rebellion is an important moment in history. We're going to touch on that later, right? This might be a long live, okay? To ward off such events, the plantation owners initially sought to protect themselves by giving their Christian servants, Europeans, legal privileges not available to their enslaved Negroes. The idea was to buy off their allegiance of indentured Europeans with a set of entitlements that, however meager, set them above enslaved Africans. Toward the end of the 17th century, this scheme witnessed a significant shift. Many of the laws that regulated slave and servant behavior, the 1681 Servant Act in Jamaica, for example, which later copied for use in South Carolina, began to describe privileged class as whites and not as Christians. Here's let me put this on the record too, that one of the issues that I believe people are bumping into in the reparations argument, when we say black in law, what is the legal status of a black person? Because white became a legal status. So in international law, what is a black person? And when black was created as a classification for millions of people, does the sorcery in the classification still stands? How are blacks recognized in international law? Because white is an actual legal status. So what is black? And is it possible that the discrimination, the malnutrition, the poverty, the things that everybody that identifies as black goes through, is it possible that that is because of a legal status? Words. See the power of words? If you call someone black legally, what does it mean? And if you call someone white legally, not feelings, not your belief in this instance, legally, what is on the books when talking about a white man or a black man, right? Because if other nations can get reparations, then that means legally they show up differently, right? The reason why blacks may not be able to get reparations because legally we may have a status that we don't know about. Okay? One of the plausible explanations for this change made by Rugemer and the historian Kathleen Gerbner, among others, is that the establishment of whiteness as a legal category solved a religious dilemma. By 1670s, Christian missionaries, including the Quaker John Fox, were insisting that enslaved Africans should be inducted into the Christian faith. Pause. So what were they before? To my believers, what was your ancestors before they were inducted? What's the point of doing 23andMe? What's the point of talking about my ancestors, my ancestors? What's the point if you don't practice their way of life? What's the point? I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do. I'm just saying, talking about how you show up, because this has everything to do with language. This has everything to do with belief. This has everything to do with software and how I use software, words, beliefs, That's all software. Okay. So before these Africans, if that's what you claim, before they were inducted into Christianity, what were they? If you're claiming FBA, before your peoples was inducted into Christianity, what were they? If you're claiming a Native American heritage, before your people were inducted into Christianity, what were they? If I say that they were into voodoo, do you look at that as demonic? Do you look at that as evil? And what if in your ancestors' history, demonic was positive? Demons were positive. What if that was the structure of their society? And what if those looking to slave them looked at their practices and their spirituality as negative? You have to look, you have to change the glasses that you look at things through, right? Okay. One of the more plausible explanations for this change, and the change they're talking about was whites and Christians and class. We're talking about legal status. One of the more plausible explanations for this change made by Reprogramming and the historian Kathleen Gerbner, among others, is that the establishment of whiteness as a legal category solved a religious dilemma. By 1670s, Christian missionaries, including Quaker John Fox, were insisting that enslaved Africans should be inducted into the Christian faith. The problem this posed for planters was obvious. If their laborers became Christian and no longer perpetual enemies of Christ, then on what legal grounds could they be slaved? And what about colonial laws that gave special privileges to Christians? Laws whose authors apparently never contemplated the possibility that Africans might someday join the faith. Okay, so what were these Africans? Because there's a religious dilemma going on in the colonies and in Jamaica and in the Caribbean. If we baptize these Africans, if we baptize these natives, then how can we slave them? Because now they are no longer the enemies of Christ. So we need another reason to do it. Because based on our belief, they will have the same legal status as an indentured European. So we need something else. The planters tried to resolve this dilemma by blocking the conversion of enslaved Africans on the grounds, as the Barbados Assembly put it in 1680, that such conversions would endanger the island, insomuch as converted Negroes grew more perverse and attractable than others. When that didn't work, the Bishop of London objected. They insisted pass laws guaranteeing that baptism could not be invoked on the ground as seeking freedom. But the latter question about the privileges for Christians required the colonists to think in a new way. No longer could their religious identity separate them and their servants from enslaved Africans. Henceforth, they would need what Morgan called a screen of racial contempt. Henceforth, they would need to start thinking of themselves as white. You see the power of language? So you got these planters, you got these wealthy elites. They're wrestling with the problem of what to do with their indentured servants, their slaves, and their Africans, right? Should they baptize these Africans? If they do, then these Africans get a new legal status, and it's hard to slave them. They need something else, right? And they need to give privileges to these indentured servants, not to put them on the level of the elite, but they need to provide privileges that would give them a status better than these Africans. So they can both be baptized and they can both be Christian. However, This indentured servant has a different status than the African. That's why you'll see in American history a very poor white dude will be like, well, at least I ain't black. Yeah, I'm broke. Yeah, I might live in a trailer, but you're black though. See the power of language? So prior to this, though, there is no concept of white. Okay? That's not a status. All right? This is all an invention. But when you put belief behind this stuff, it is powerful. Press 1 in the chat. Matter of fact, run me a 7. Press a 7 in the chat if you're with me. I know we're doing some reading today, and we're doing reading because it's not illegal yet. It's about personal development, because what I want you to walk away with is the power of your words and the power of your belief. But first, we have to track how powerful belief actually is, because it brings into existence things that were never there. Language brings into existence things that were never there. Right now, we are on the invention of whiteness. And it's important to understand, because this is going to help you understand what you're looking at. It's going to help you understand what's going on with MAGA. It's going to help you understand even your family's social positioning. Okay. As late as 1694, a slave ship captain could still question the racial logic newly implied to justify his trade. Quote, I can't think there is any intrinsic value in one color more than the other, nor that white is better than black. Only we think it's so because we are so. Thomas Phillips wrote in his diary. Basically, we're better because we think we are. All right. But whiteness quickly proved itself a powerful weapon that allowed transatlantic capitalism to secure the labor, white and African, it needed. As historian Theodore Allen put it, the plantation bourgeoisie deliberately extended a privileged status to the white poor of all categories as a means of turning to African slavery as the basis of its system of production. Regardless of what you think about in this political cycle, what I'm looking at in my research is a lot of people that are following the MAGA movement. It's more about the ideal of whiteness and entitlement, right? It has everything to do with that. Not saying everybody. There's some people that are looking into policies, but a lot of people, a large body of people, are associating MAGA with whiteness and their status in the States, right? Because what they're looking at is their status changing. It's not even about the money. It's not even about upward mobility. It's basically about, hey, we don't have anybody under us. Because the promise for whiteness is that you're going to have this new class of people who are black under. So when you watch the movie The Great Debaters, this professional man is riding with his family, Forrest Whitaker's character. And these poor white guys tell him to get out and pick up a pig. See, they have that even if they don't have money, even if this is a professional, college educated black man, legally based on status, you're under me. And that right there is changing. It ain't even about the money. It ain't even about quality of life. Because if that social status, that thinking is not there, then what does it mean to be white in America if you do not have a big class of people under you? If it is same, I run the race, you run the race. We got the same ability, and the best man will win, then there's no whiteness. There's no incentive to be white. The incentive works because there's people under, right? The economic utility of the ideal of whiteness helped spread rapidly around the world. Du Bois was not wrong to call it a religion. For like a religion, it operated at every psychological, sociological, and political scale from the most intimate to the most public. Like a religion, too, it adapted to local conditions. What it meant to be white in British Virginia was not identical to what it meant to be white, to what it mean in New York before American Civil War, in India during the Raj, in Georgia during Jim Crow, in Australia after the Federation, or in Germany during the Third Reich. But what united all these expressions was a singular ideal. The same group of people called white was naturally superior to others, as Benjamin Disraeli, the Victorian prime minister and one of the most committed race ideologists of his time, put it. Race implies difference. Difference implies superiority, and superiority leads to predominance. The ideal of whiteness, in other words, was identical to the ideal of white supremacy. For 3 centuries that preceded the civil rights movement, the presumption was accepted at the most refined levels of culture by people who, in other contexts, were among the most vocal advocates of human liberty and equality. It is well known that Immanuel Kant argued that we should treat every person always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. Less well known is his proposal in his lectures on physical geography, published in 1882, that humanity at its greatest perfection in the race of whites. Humanity is at its greatest perfection in the race of whites, or his claim in his notes for lectures on anthropology that Native Americans and Negroes cannot govern themselves. Now, I just want you to sit with that for a second, right? That there is a belief in academia, right? This came from Immanuel Kant, who is revered as a thought leader. He says that Native Americans and Negroes can't govern themselves, thus serve only as slaves. Even Gandhi, during the early part of his life, accepted the basic lie of whiteness, arguing that the English and Indians spring from a common stock called Indo-Aryan, and the white race in South Africa should be the predominating race. This is what Gandhi thought. You see how belief is powerful? This shit didn't exist at all. And then all of a sudden, it starts to take form. A new way of looking at the world. You're looking at yourself as superior. But before that, there was a religious way to looking at the world. See belief? See how what you believe matters? What you believe changes the environment of the world. And the fact that it is on the books in Western culture, in fact, all over the world, that the Negro can't govern him or herself. Now, I want you to read that, then look at it through that lens as we're watching reality TV, as we're watching The Shade Room, as we're watching Pop the Balloon. If you adjust your glasses and look at it another way, does the Negro, man and woman, on a day-to-day basis fuel scientific racism, fuel these stereotypes? Does it look like we can govern ourselves? Regardless if this shit is true or not, it's what the world believes, because this has been on the books for a couple hundred years, and they use skulls to help with the stereotype. They use sexuality and what our genitalia looks like to help with the stereotypes and the scientific racism. Now, how do we show up to help that? The conversations of gender back and forth about what the black woman isn't, what the black woman isn't it. Look at it through the lens of you ain't black, or you're not FBA. You're different. What if you a person be like, you know what? Let me give these people a chance. Let me just look inside their culture and see what it looks like. What does it look like? Right? Because it's on the books that people that have been living for millions of years all of a sudden can't govern themselves because the European says so. You see how powerful that is? When millions of people were trapped in an ice age, there were melanated people. They weren't necessarily living in harmony, but they had culture, they had spirituality. They were at least in harmony with their environment. Of course, wars went on, of course, but they were in harmony with their environment. They had astronomy, they had cosmology, they had astrology, they had math, they had a way of life that predates Europe. But because of belief, now it is believed that, you know what? These people can't govern themselves. They need us to do it. Yeah, it's very important that you check yourself on how you move. If you identify as melanated or FBA, or it's important that you check yourself because you were born in a system of language and belief. So you may think that you're just having a panel and you talking about why black women don't get married, why black men don't get married, without any historical context of how those things look like that. And then what kind of marriage, right? When y'all are clashing with each other, what is the basis of your clash? What lens are you looking at? Yeah, it's because black people don't go to church no more. They didn't go from the jump though. It's because black people don't get married. Okay, what kind of marriage? What kind of marriage? Walking down the aisle? Is that the behavior of these people's ancestors? So you're on each other's neck saying the man ain't doing this and the woman ain't doing this based on an artificial standard that your peoples didn't even go by and your people fought against. But that is the measuring stick on how y'all looking at each other. That's crazy. And it's based on the belief and the language of another group of people. Do y'all really, are you really against white supremacy? If so, you wouldn't get married like that. You wouldn't have a black tux on. She wouldn't have a white gown on. How is that not white supremacy? How do you want to tear down white supremacy but keep the religion? But keep the customs, keep the language, keep the way to look at the world? How do you want to tear down this idea of white supremacy, but at the same time be an enemy of nature and look at people that have reverence to the environment as pagan? The average man and woman living in cities, their feet actually never touch the soil. They're walking around in concrete all day, right? The average woman has panties, bra, pants, shirt, right? How is that not white supremacy? Because guess what? When these people pulled up to your people weren't wearing that. How you got panties, pants, then pants over that? You got a bra under your shirt, right? A dude got short underwear, shorts, trousers. Uh, that is that's people that dress for the cold. Oh, that is white. Oh, that is white. And we literally are at each other's throat based on another people's standard. Well, that's because we're inside of an empire. America's an empire. The West is an empire. An actual empire. Like when you think of Rome, America's an empire. So we are arguing back and forth based on the standard of the empire. These men ain't doing this. And what is the this? It's based on the standard of the empire. These women aren't doing this. And what is the this she's not doing? Based on the standard of an empire, which is fine. You can do that. You can adapt. You can adjust. But you have to stop talking about ancestors, though. You can't do both, right? Because the ancestors weren't part of this empire. None of the behavior we do, they do. Our behavior is based on being conquered. Okay. And this is all based on language and belief. Okay. Uh, okay. So even Gandhi says that the English and Indians spring from a common stock called the Indo-Aryan, and that the white race in South Africa should be the predominating race. As though aware of their own guilty conscience, the evangelists of the religion of whiteness were always desperate to prove that it was something other than mere prejudice. Where the Bible still held sway, they bent the story of Noah's son Ham in a divine apologia for white supremacy. When autonomy and anthropology gained prestige in the 18th and 19th century, they cited pseudoscientific markers for racial difference, like the Caliphate Index and the Norma Vesticalis. When psychology took over, they told themselves flattering stories about divergencies in IQ. For all their evident success, the devotees of the religion of whiteness were never able to achieve the total vision they longed for. In part, this was because there was always dissenters, including among those who stood to gain from it, who rejected the creed of racial superiority. Alongside those remembered by history, Elizabeth Freeman, Toussaint Louverture, Harriet Tubman, Sitting Bull, Franz Boas, Haviva Reich, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, there were millions of now forgotten people who used whatever means they possessed to resist it, in part to the nonsense logic that regulated the boundaries of whiteness, the one drop rule in the US, which said that anyone with black ancestry could not be white. The endless arguments over what Caucasian was supposed to mean. And look at this, the honorary Aryan status that Hitler extended to the Japanese was no match for the robust complexity of human society. Hitler extended a status to the Japanese. There is a reason why someone from South America comes to America and says they're white. This has nothing to do with self-hate. White in America became a legal status. Do you want to get some housing? Say you white. You want to get some insurance? Say you white. Have a white name. This has nothing to do with self. This has everything to do with survival. Black is a legal status. So if you have a quote black name and they're looking at a job application, they're discriminating based on legal status. This looks African. This looks black. So when I sit and name my name John Brown, it's a good white Christian name for survival. Many of your peoples and ancestors became Christian not because they believed in the teachings of the gospel. And there's some great teachings. It is, if you know how to use it. They became that because they had to assimilate. Because guess what? Christian was a status and white was a status. Your peoples had to survive because they was catching too much hell. Native Americans stopped rain dancing because they were catching too much hell. So sure, build a church on my land. Sure, I'm aware of cross because I need to blend in. Right? I need to blend in. That's interesting that Hitler was able to extend a status to the Japanese. Yet, if the religion of whiteness was never able to gain acceptance as an unchallengeable scientific fact, it was still hugely successful at shaping social reality. Some of the success had to do with its flexibility. Thanks to its role in facilitating slavery, whiteness in the US was often defined in opposition to blackness. But between these two extremes was room for tactical accommodation. In 1751, Benjamin Franklin could claim that only one of the English and Saxons made the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. And nearly 80 years later, Ralph Waldo Emerson would insist that the Irish, like the Chinese and the Native American, were not Caucasian. Over time, however, the definitions of who counted as culturally white expanded to include Catholics from Southern Europe, the Irish, and even Jews, who for centuries had been seen as quintessential outsiders. You see what I mean about status, right? Originally, when the colonies were being developed, only the English were seen as white. The Irish weren't. The Greek people from Greece weren't. Jews weren't, right? When they were coming to Ellis Island, when they were coming to America, they became white. They came Irish. They came Polish. They came Armenian. They came German. And when they got to America, found out that they were white, which was a new status. But guess what? Even though they probably may not have had a job from it, guess what they found out? They found out when they came to America, there was a subgroup called Black. That was your incentive as a man, right? That when you come to America, there is a group of people that you are better than. You know what kind of confidence that is? That I'm struggling, that I'm having marriage issues, I'm struggling to feed my family. But guess what? Guess what? At least I ain't Black. This is all language. Even to people of European descent that are coming in poor Polish, right? That have no ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but was given the ability because of this new classification called whiteness or being white. Now, guess who identifies as white now? Irish, Polish, Jews, Spanish, Portuguese, many Asian people, many people in Latin America. Why? Because whiteness has these built-in perks and blackness doesn't. There is no perk to say that you're Black. You get nothing from it but an L. Even among the people that identify themselves as Black, the groups of Black people that identify as that don't give each other perks. They give each other hell. Why? Because there's a spell on that shit. When a lower class FBA gets a promotion or money, where do they move? They move away from those class of Blacks to a different class, majority white. When we say, oh, that's some nigga shit, that has a meaning, that it's less quality. You see? Language? Yeah, you know, color people time. What does that mean? I'm late. Black is not associated with any positives, only negatives. And the people that identify it with it carry the software around and put it amongst each other. See the power of belief? You see the power of language? Yeah, that's some nigga shit. Okay, now what are they saying that's some nigga shit? Janky, no quality, disorganized. Look at even us buying into the narrative. See the power of language. What does color people time mean? That you're late. And we weaponize this language to each other. You know why? Because we believe in whiteness. And we haven't taken the time that if we're going to identify as an FBA or if we're going to identify as a black person, what are the positive connotations associated with the language? Because there is positives associated with this ideal of whiteness. They've had couple hundred years of history to work on this shit. So what is the positives when you say you're a black woman? What is the characteristics associated with that? Positive. When you say you're a black man, what is the characteristics that are positive associated with identifying with that? If there's no positives, then you should not call yourself a black man or a black woman. Honestly, you better off calling yourself white. You know why? Because there's perks. There's legal protection. All this arguing back and forth of who's a tether and who's FBA. Well, what's the positives to be the FBA though? What's the positives? What's the group perks? What does it mean to stay on code? What do the people that stay on code receive? Because guess what those that identified as white receive? The Homestead Act, land, an opportunity to succeed. Not just that, they also received a status that legally gave them a better quality of life than these people called blacks. At least I ain't black. And guess what? Guess what we turn around and do? The romantic conversations that we have amongst each other. It goes a little something like this. We're the only group of people that does X, Y, Z. Other groups of people are getting married. Other groups of people save their money. Look at the negative language. Look at the negative language. We're the only group of people that does our woman like this. How do you know? We're the only group of people where the women disrespect the men. How do you know? I don't never see Asian people talk like this because you don't have an Asian algorithm. So how would you know? But there is a need to believe in the prosperity and the well-being and the capability of everybody that doesn't classify themselves as black. That's why those that identify as SBA and black always have negative talk when it comes towards the group. See, that's why we can't have nothing. You see two melanated people fight in the street, you know what we say? We got to do better. We got to do better. There's an association with the negativity. But if that man and that woman get married, we don't say, oh, that's what we need to keep doing, y'all. You know what we say? They. When a melanated man or woman is disciplined and they film the discipline, right? We don't say, look at us. We say, oh, that dude is dope. That woman is dope. But when they fuck up, they become a we. That's because there is something that is baked in to the ideal of blackness, and it's negative. And when it comes to white, white is pegged to everything pure, everything moral, everything intellectual. White is pegged with good luck. White is You see the language? This is nothing but belief, y'all. That's all it is. It's belief. Whatever we believe, it becomes reality. Bruce Lipton talks about this shit. There was nothing superior about these people. That Europeans have a history of plagues, and these plagues are based on hygiene, not bathing, right? How all of a sudden, when they come to America, that they become superior? Belief, language. Let's continue. The religion of whiteness also found success by persuading its adherents that they are not the people they oppressed. We're, this is interesting because you hear this with MAGA supporters now. The religion of whiteness also found success by persuading its adherents that they, and not the people they oppressed, were the real victims. In 1692, colonial legislators in British Barbados complained, sundry of the Negroes and slaves of this island have been longing, preparing, contriving, conspiring, and desiring a most horrid, bloody, damnable, and detestable rebellion, massacre, assassination, and destruction. From there, it was a more or less straight line to Woodrow Wilson's claim in 1903 that the Southerners who started the Ku Klux Klan were aroused by the mere instinct of self-preservation, and to Donald Trump's warning when he launched his presidential campaign in 2015 that Mexican immigrants to the U.S. were bringing drugs and they are bringing crime and they're rapists. Now, when you listen to a uneducated MAGA supporter, right? What do they say? They're foreign countries are trying to take our freedom. What do they say? They're white people are under attack. Now these are gun owners now, right? One of the things with classifying as whiteness is even though you're the aggressor, you're also a victim. You see how powerful this shit is? That even though that you're the aggressor, you are also the victim. Oh, they're trying to take our jobs. Oh, the tanning of America, right? No matter what history we look at, where we see colonialism and those of European descent dominating others, when you classify as whiteness, you always see yourself as the victim at the same time, even though you're the aggressor and the starter of the problem. Oh, it's a war on whiteness. They're coming for our guns. No one else can be a victim, though. Do you know why? Because of the status of black. In black, you can't be a victim because the definition of black is immoral anyway, evil, incapable of being pure, not in belief, in language. So y'all don't think that the colonists had the colonists had a priesthood? This is all sorcery, and it's based on language. There was a reason that many of them wanted us to speak Ebonics. You know why? Because if we speak Ebonics and we don't master this language, then we can't have counter magic. If you speak Ebonics, if you speak the language incorrectly, then you can't cast spells in their system. When you talk white, I'm not talking skin, okay? When you talk white and you have a command of the language, you have the ability to cast spells. See, we have an emotional connection to it, right? So we want to make themes and concepts mean what we want it to mean. And you can when you're the dominant culture. When you're the losing culture, you can't, because these things have been placed on you and your peoples. So you must figure out how the sorcery and the magic is done so you can create counter magic. And there's no counter magic on the labels in terms of black. It still means what they initially meant it to mean: negative, undisciplined, can't govern. And we act this shit out every day. We act it out every day. Look how we weaponize the language with each other every single time we talk to each other. Like, and first of all, if there is even a each other, if we ain't the same, don't trip. But if we're claiming to be the same and we have a common story, which is a Jim Crow story, a slavery story, an oppression story, if we're claiming that we're the same, look at the language we use with each other and how we carve each other up with the language. Every time we talk, the title of the video: did black women really turn on black men for welfare? Why do black men prefer non-black women? Do light-skinned black, well, listen, we don't even talk right. The fact that we can even say something is light-skinned black, there, you can't be black cannot be light. It is black. Black can't be dark. It is. As a dark-skinned black, how can you be both at the same time? How can you be light-skinned and black? You see? We don't even look at the language that we're using. Yeah, I'm a light-skinned black man. I'm a dark-skinned black man. Yo, you ever look at a crown? There is no light black crown, and there's no dark black crown. I understand what you're trying to say. You're trying to use black as if it's an actual racial category. And if we subscribe to it, it's a legal status. And the legal status is at the bottom. That's what it was meant to be. When we're called black, it reduces who we are. When that baby comes out the womb, it's not black until we say so. The moment that we call our babies black, we create a status. I know we have emotions to it. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. So we dance and we try to come together and we try to create culture from it. And the attempt, the intention, we mean well, but we don't understand that we're dealing with magic. We don't understand that we're dealing with law and classification. So we dance and we sing songs and we pray, hoping that the dancing and the songs we sing and the praying changes the status. How's that going? Where the religion of whiteness was not capable to win converts with persuasion of fear, it deployed cruder measures to secure its power, conscripting laws, institutions, customs, churches to enforce its prerogatives. Above all, it demanded on force. By the middle of the 20th century, the presumption that a race of people called white were superior to all others had supplied the central justification, not just for the transatlantic slave trade, but also for the near total extinction of Indians in North America, for Belgian atrocities in Congo, for the bloody colonialization of India, East Africa, and Australia by Britain, for the equally bloody colonialization of North and West Africa and South Asia by France, for the deployment of the final solution in Nazi Germany, and for the apartheid state in South Africa. And those are merely the most extreme examples. Alongside those murdered, raped, and enslaved in the name of whiteness, the total number whom runs at least to 9 figures are an almost unthinkable number of people whose lives have been shortened, constrained, and antagonized and insulted on a daily basis. That was only laying the groundwork of whiteness, right? That was only the foundation. We had to lay that foundation because this is the birth of this new area. This is the birth of the Virginia colony, right? So we fast forwarded a little bit to give context. Now we got to go back to Virginia because there's a way that we can track the changing of language, that black and white wasn't used the way that we use it now. And you can see the advancement in history of white and how it changes. And then black as a classification, what happens to that as well? The purpose of the video today is, if white has that much power, and when belief is put behind it, what happens when you put belief behind your words too? What happens when you begin to change your language too? And if identifying as white has a superiority complex, right? What happens when you reprogram the meaning of black? If you reprogram the meaning of black, do you have an expectation that you get the job? Do you have an expectation to be wealthy? Right? Are you willing to colonize? Meaning go other places and plant flags. One of the problems with identifying as black is the unwillingness to do what's necessary to win. That's true. That even though black is considered immoral in law and language, somehow those that identify as black always take the high ground. Oh no, we're trying to tear down systems, but they're still building them though. How's that going? How is it going trying to tear down systems? Right? How's it going? Because the mindset of those that believe in whiteness are building them, and that's the wiring. So when you're tearing them down, you're losing. Because in whiteness, might is right. You got 2 different belief systems, right? Those that are black, even though losing, still have this humanitarian thing, a viewpoint about the world. And you'll hear a black man and a black woman say, I love everybody. That's impossible. That's impossible. You don't even know everybody. That is impossible, but that has been pumped into those that classify and identify as black. And the reason why is, as long as you love everybody, you'll say things like, money isn't everything, the meek shall inherit the earth, right? You will apply a Christian belief that other Christian groups are not applying to you. Love thy neighbor, but they're not doing that to you, right? Their religion means something different because in their mind, Christianity is white, right? It's ours. We are loaning it to you to civilize your barbaric nature, right? You got to understand, if you are a black believer, a melanated believer in Christianity, the narrative is you are borrowing it because that is the only thing that can civilize your nature. With European culture, how it was Christianity is the standard for the black and brown world. You're a visitor. Look at the missionaries. Where do they go? Where do they go? Where do the missionaries go to spread the gospel? In exchange for your belief, you will lose your land, but you'll get salvation somewhere else. They genuinely believe when they are converting black and brown people into the faith, they are saving you. That's the ideal of whiteness. That's how powerful it is. That's how powerful it is. So let's go back to the Virginia colonies, and we're going to look at John Punch, right? By the way, this is a body bag. My AKA is Body Bag Ken. And I know it's a body bag because I'm so let me just talk my shit. Because if you just go through my video library of where we go when we go live, no matter how many views it got, we go in a direction that ain't nobody else going. That's a fact. Right? The algorithm oftentimes doesn't know what to do with my content because it goes the total opposite direction of the subscriber base. Now, my subscriber base is people that identify as black. The reason why they don't know that I'm live, the reason why they don't even get a notification to the content is because the algorithm knows that's not what they're interested in. Even though the subscriber base identifies as black. And even though we talk about personal development, this is further proof that there is something baked into the classification of black, that it's natural to run away from personal development and run towards games and play. I believe it's in the DNA because it's been going on for so long. That is the natural state for those that identify as black at the moment. That, let me turn my brain off. If it's not entertainment, I can't listen to it. But that's okay. That's why you have to develop a take the stairs mentality. You understand what it is, and you have accepted your burden of being a grinder, and you're going to take the stairs, right? So we're going to take the stairs over here because this is heaven on earth, right? So we're going to go into John Punch, right? What is this next slide? Right? So John Punch is an interesting case, right? John Punch is an interesting character because John Punch is considered the first slave in this new ideal of the Americas, which is not America yet, it's the colonies. John Punch is slaved for his natural life. He starts off as an indentured servant, right, to a European. So John Punch tries to run away with a Dutchman and a man from Scotland. Okay. The other two are sentenced to 4 more years of servitude. John Punch is sentenced to natural life to be a servant. Okay? He's sentenced to natural life, and all 3 of them got lashes. 30 of them. Now, the interesting thing about this is John Punch is not sentenced to life slavery because of his skin. He's sentenced to natural slavery because of his status as an African. And the European understands that the African is not Christian. At least those from West Africa, where these people came from. So he is sentenced to he's sentenced to life because of his status. Matter of fact, I could be capping. So let's read a little bit about Mr. Punch, because he's actually an interesting character. And I want to show you who they actually say John Punch is related to, too. Right? So this is not like super deep research right here. This is nothing but just a quick wiki search about Mr. Punch. So John Punch, 1605, 1650, right, was an African resident of the colony of Virginia who became its first slave. Thought to have been an indentured servant, Punch attempted to escape to Maryland and was sentenced in July 1640 by the Virginia Governor's Council to serve as a slave for the remainder of his life. 2 European men who ran away with him received a lighter sentence of extended indentured servitude. For this reason, some historians consider John Punch the first official slave in English colonies, and his case as the first legal sanctioning of lifelong slavery in the Chesapeake. Some historians also consider this to be one of the first legal distinctions between Europeans and Africans made in the colony, a keystone milestone in the development of the institution of slavery in the United States. John Punch. It wasn't because he was, quote, black. It's Englishman and African. But the real distinction is John Punch is not a Christian. In July 2012, Ancestry.com published a paper suggesting that John Punch was the 12th generation grandfather of US President Barack Obama on his mother's side, based on historical and genealogical research and Y-DNA analysis. Punch descendants were known as Bunch or Bunchy surname. Punch is also to believe one of the paternal ancestors of the 20th century American diplomat Ralph Bunchy, the first African American to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Remember the last video we did about bloodline? Remember the nepotism we did? My last video. And I was showing you who was related to who, and that when you're in the industry, you have to be connected to something. Now, no conspiracy theory or anything, but is it a coincidence that John Punch, the first slave in the Americas, based on academia, in the colonies, he's related to Barack Obama? Do you think that's one of the reasons why Obama was selected to be the president? Because he comes from a very long bloodline in the Americas. He is part of the original New Americans. Now, I'm not talking about anyone native, First Nations. I'm talking about this new ideal of America that starts in the 16th, 17th century. Barack Obama's bloodline is one of the originals. That would make sense on his position in the States. John Punch. Look into that. So, Theodore Allen notes that the courts, being Negro justification, made no explicit reference to precedent in English or Virginia common law, and suggests that the court members may have been aware of common law that held a Christian could not enslave a Christian, with Punch being presumed to be non-Christian, unlike his accomplices. Weary of the diplomatic friction that would come from enslaving Christian Europeans and possibly hopeful of replicating the lifetime indentures of enslaved Africans held in the Caribbean and South American colonies. Further proof, this is further proof, and a pushback of a new movement that is coming with the black church in America saying that they were Christians before the slave trade. No, you weren't. Or at least if you're coming from West Africa. In fact, I don't think that the Coptic Christians in Ethiopia, I think that was more of a priesthood. I don't think that was a public movement. When the Portuguese, the English, French, Dutch, Spanish, when they came to Africa, when they came to Americas, they don't recognize any Christian nation. That's the reason for the treatment. So this new movement trying to reshape history as if when these people were persecuted, they were already Christian, that's cap. Because the Europeans would be breaking the law. We'll get into that in a second too, because this is just showing you the power of language and belief. So to my Christian listeners, it is not my intention to offend you. I am only reading history. Now, if you are a believer and you accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior, that is your right and you can do it. However, it was never intended for you to use to change your life and get a win. It was used as an act of war against people that look like you. But if you find that you can use the Bible, right, to change your life, hell, shit, do that shit. But understand historically, as long as you can separate that you find meaning in the book from the historical context, that's different. That's different. Historically, this was an act of war. But if you can find use for it in your personal life, do it. Just separate your ancestors from it because they weren't this, right? And separate and don't try to convert anybody, right? Use the gospel for yourself. Don't try to spread it because it was spread as an act of terrorism. That's not my opinion. That's facts. So the character John Punch now is a lifetime slave because he committed a crime, which he ran away from being an indentured servant. But it wasn't because he was black. This doesn't come yet. Now, moving on. Let's talk about class for a second. Because class shows up early in colonial America. Again, belief, status. It is a huge mistake for us to idolize celebrities because they're at a different class and they don't give no fuck about you, right? And you may think that you have something in common because you believe that we are brothers and sisters. We generally believe that, right? So when you look at LeBron's family, you're like, oh yeah, oh my God, he's the black family. That's how it's supposed to be done. You mirror them. as if they have a connection to you, but they don't, because they're at a different class. Denzel Washington is at a different class. Angela Bassett is at a different class. And how celebrities are with the lower class, it's not the first time that happened. They do not see you as their brother or sister. Their brothers and sisters are in the same class as them. How do we know this? Enter Anthony Johnson. Okay. Anthony Johnson is no different than so-called blacks that are elite right now. And it is a mistake for you to say all skin folk ain't kinfolk. You never was family with these people. As if to say, by nature, we're related. That's white. That's thinking white. They classified that and said, you know what? You're brown. Y'all mate with each other because y'all the same. But we're not though, right? We choose to be the same because of conflict, and our connection is trauma. But are we the same? Because if so, if we the same, then I need some perks on being your brother. What do I get out of it? We just can't be black and sweaty together in the summertime, hot as hell. What's the perk? If you call me brother, then can I ask you for some shit? If like you gonna look out for my kid, I'm gonna look out for yours. We need to stop using this language if it doesn't actually mean anything, because it means something to say Jewish. It means something to say white. There's perks with that. Okay. So Anthony Johnson exists at the same time that John Punch exists. Right? Now I want to introduce you to so-called black capitalism 400 years ago. You know how they say for 400 years we've been slaves. For 400 years, the system wasn't designed for us. Okay. What about Anthony Johnson? Right? For 400 years? Now, mind you, I said Anthony Johnson was alive the same time as John Punch. But how does Anthony Johnson see the world? All right? How does he see the world? Anthony Johnson lived to be 70 years old, was an Angolan born man who achieved wealth in the early 17th century colony of Virginia. He, held as an indentured servant in 1621. He earned his freedom after several years and was granted land by the colony. Wait a minute. The way we're taught is niggas ain't never have anything. What do you mean he was granted land? Hold on. Let me go back to this picture just to see how they depict him. Interesting. Okay. Because I wanted to see what his features were. All right. So he was granted land. He became a tobacco farmer in Maryland. He attained great wealth after completing his term as an indentured servant and has been referred to as the Black Patriarch of the first community of Negro property owners in America. Wait a minute. The first Black Patriarch of Negro property owners? But I thought niggas ain't own anything. Something's fishy going on. Because I've been taught a very poverty narrative on how to look at America. Like, we're just now starting to do well. We're just now starting to own property. But let me go back up to the date that he was born. 1600. Yo, this is 400 years ago. Interesting. In early 1620s, African slave traders kidnapped the man who would later be known as Anthony Johnson in Portuguese Angola and sold him to Portuguese slavers who named him Antonio and sold him into the Atlantic slave trade. A colonist, wait, first off, roll it back. Can't skip over this. Because when does pro-blackness start? Show me pro-blackness in old Africa. Show me this sense of brotherhood based on skin tone. Where is the ancient document that bans slavers, kidnapping, the selling of other humans? I don't know everything. Is there a document, an ancient document in Africa that bans the selling of people? What African nations were against this? Some would say, what, they're prisoners of war. Show me the document that bans kidnapping and enslaving of other human beings. Because it's very difficult to put the white man on trial if the behavior of the so-called Negro in Africa is the goddamn same. Some would say, well, they didn't know what was going to happen. It shouldn't happen. No way. In early 1620s, Africans slave traders kidnapped a man who would later be known as Anthony Johnson in Portuguese Angola and sold him to Portuguese slavers who named him Antonio and sold him into the Atlantic slave trade. A colonist in Virginia bought Antonio as an indentured servant. Antonio worked for a merchant at the Virginia Company. He was also received into the Roman Catholic Church. You see the induction into Christianity again. So what was Antonio? What was Antonio? If he was received into the Roman Catholic Church, what was he before that? Mm-hmm. So we keep seeing, we see this showing up again, that at least when it comes to West Africa, these people were not Catholic. These people were not Christian. This theme keeps coming up because the majority of people that we're saying were in the Americas from Africa were from that region. And what we see is they were not Christian. They had to be introduced to this. So what were they before that? He sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the James. The Virginia muster census of 1624 lists him as Antonio, not given record as Negro in the notes column. Historians dispute whether this was the same Antonio later named as Anthony Johnson, as the census lists several men named Antonio. This one is considered most likely. Okay. Johnson was sold as an indentured servant to a white planter named Bennett to work on his Virginia tobacco farm. Slave laws were not passed until 1661 in Virginia. Before that date, Africans were not officially considered to be enslaved. Such workers typically worked under a limited indentured contract for 4 to 7 years to pay off their passage, room, board, lodging, and freedom dues. In the early colonial years, most Africans in the 13 colonies were held under such contracts of limited indentured servitude. Except for those indentured for life, they were released after a contracted period. Those who managed to survive their period of indenture would receive land and equipment after their contracts expired or were brought out. We're not taught that. We are not taught early colonial American history. So let me get this straight. So when these Africans were done with their indentured servitude, they were given equipment. They were given land? But I thought niggas ain't never had nothing. But what is most important here is Anthony Johnson is not identified as being black. He has no legal status associated with that yet. He becomes Christian for legal purposes, right? So that puts him on the same level as a European indentured servant. Okay? Those who managed to survive their period of indenture would receive land and equipment after their contracts expired or were brought out. I'll be damned if somebody tell me America's not mine, man. This ain't our shit. You crazy? This is 400 years ago. Most white laborers in this period also came to the colony as indentured servants. Antonio almost died in the Indian massacre of 1622 when Bennett's plantation was attacked. The Powhatan, who were the indigenous people dominant at the time in Tidewater region of Virginia, were attempting to evict the colonists. They raided the settlement where Johnson worked on Good Friday and killed 52 of the 57 men present. In 1623, a black woman named Mary arrived aboard the ship Margaret. She was brought to work on the same plantation as Antonio, where she was the only woman present. Antonio and Mary married and lived together for more than 40 years. Okay, my nigga bagged that. Okay. See, you got a little Mac hand. All right. Sometime after 1635, Antonio and Mary concluded the term of their indentured servitude. Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. He first entered the legal record as an unindentured man when he purchased a calf in 1647. The colonial government granted a large plot of farmland after he paid off his indentured contract by his labor. On July 24th, 1651, he acquired 250 acres of land under the headright system by buying the contracts of the 5 indentured servants, one of them who was his son. Richard Johnson. The headright system worked by buying the contracts of the 5 indentured servants, one of whom was his son, Richard Johnson. The headright system worked so that if a man were to bring indentured servants over to the colonies, in this particular case, Johnson bought the 5 servants, he was owed 50 acres as a head, 50 acres a head or servant. The land was located in the Great Saskatoon Creek, which flowed into the Pongotique River in Northampton, Virginia. What's the first thing Johnson does when he gets his freedom of indentured servitude? He buys a calf, right? So when they track Negroes and they say 1619, let's talk about the whole shit, right? Let's talk about the fact that there is a history of capitalism for those that identify as FBA, because Johnson would be FBA. And what does he do? He buys a calf, and he has 250 acres of land. He automatically goes into grind mode. But what is he doing with all this land? Because we're not taught that, right? The way that we are taught, the narrative of so-called blackness in America is always from the perspective of capitalism is our enemy, fuck property, right? America is not ours. And you have pro-black people, modern pro-black people, who point our attention over to another landmass. Why? Why? When Anthony Johnson had 250 acres, is he our descendant or no? Hmm? The moment an African were free from being indentured servants, they went right into grind mode. But let's continue because something interesting happened. Johnson ran a tobacco farm using indentured servants. One of his servants, John Kesar, would later become one of the first African men to be declared indentured for life. In 1652, an unfortunate fire caused great losses for the family, and Johnson applied to the courts for tax relief. The court reduced his family taxes and, on February 28, 1652, exempted his wife Mary and their two daughters from paying taxes. Wait a minute. These are so-called black people that don't got to pay no taxing. Who the hell is Anthony Johnson? Because I was taught that the courts are no place for a Negro. And I was taught that America is not ours. I was taught that capitalism, the Negro cannot show up correctly in capitalism. But explain this to me. In 1652, an unfortunate fire caused great losses for the family, and Johnson applied to the courts for tax relief. The court reduced the family's taxes and, on 1652, exempted his wife Mary and their two daughters from paying taxes during their natural lives. At this time, taxes were levied on people, not property. Under the 1645 Virginia Taxation Act, all Negro men and women and all other men from 16 to 60 years old shall be tithable. It is unclear from the records why the Johnson women were exempted. But the change gave them the same social standing as white women who were not taxed. Interesting. 400 years ago, she wasn't considered a black woman, but this was what we would call her now. 400 years ago, a black woman named Mary was tax exempt in the colony of Virginia, and she had the same social standing as a white woman 400 years ago. One of the things that is baked into the ideal of blackness is being anti-system. Hell, it happened to me too, where I was saying F the system, F everything, right? And because I didn't know that there were melanated people playing the game 400 years ago, and they had land 400 years ago, and they were doing business 400 years ago. I thought to be a real nigga was to be anti everything. F school, F life insurance, F annuities, F the stock market, F this whole thing. I'm trying to tear it down. To be a real nigga is to be anti. That's the position that I took because I bought into the legal status that comes with black. We ain't never owned nothing. It's impossible. There's a talking point to it. There's a belief system that goes to it. But when you peel back the layers of history, Antonio, who later became Anthony Johnson, had a wife named Mary who had the same status as a white woman in colonial Virginia. What changed? What happened? During the case, the justices noticed that Anthony and Mary have lived inhabitants in Virginia above 30 years and had been respected for their hard labor and known service. Respected. Why? Why? By 1650s, Anthony and Mary were farming 250 acres in Northampton County, while their sons owned 550 acres. Total, this family of so-called black people owned 700 and owned 800 acres. 250, 550, 800. This family owns 800 acres of land. Now, when we talk about 400 years ago, we paint this narrative of Amistad. But something happens. The difference between of what happens to Anthony and his bloodline is the belief and language thing, because it's about to come in play. The reason why Anthony Johnson, one, was able to do this is because he became a Christian, and two, because there was no legal status on what black was. But that changes soon. When Anthony Johnson was released from his servitude, he was legally recognized as a free Negro. He became a skillful farmer. In 1651, he owned 250 acres and the services of 5 indentured servants, 4 white and 1 black. So Anthony Johnson has 4 European indentured servants working for him. Interesting. So you know he gets paid off their work, right? Okay. In 1653, John Kesar, a black indentured servant whose contract Johnson appeared to have bought in the early 1640s, approached Captain Goldsmith claiming his indenture his indenture had expired 7 years earlier and that he was being held legally by Johnson. A neighbor, Robert Parker, intervened and persuaded Johnson to free Kesar. Parker offered Kesar work and he signed a term of indenture to the planter. Johnson, back in court, remember, they were in court before because of the fire. So he goes back in court. Johnson filed a freedom suit against Parker, who's a European, in Northampton Court in 1654 for the return of Kesar, who we would identify as black at this time. The court initially ruled in favor of Parker, but Johnson appealed. He goes back to court. In 1655, the court reversed its ruling, finding that Anthony Johnson still owned Kesar. The court ordered that he be returned with the court dues paid by Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson wins against a so-called white man. He wins in court. And what does he win? He wins his black slave back, who they consider indentured servant. But something interesting is happening here, because Anthony Johnson is moving like this in the colonies because black is not a legal status at this moment. So he has the same rights as Europeans. They are the same in law. In fact, Parker has to pay dues to Johnson for his trouble. This was the first instance of a judicial determination in the 13 colonies holding that a person who had committed no crime be held in servitude for life. Who was now a lifetime slave? John Kesar. He didn't break the law. The court ruled that this so-called black man be returned back to Johnson for life. John Kesar becomes Anthony Johnson's lifetime servant, and he hasn't broke the law. Anthony Johnson does not look at him as a brother. You know why? Because that shit don't exist. There ain't no such thing as pro-black. There ain't no such thing as you're my brother. That comes with Afrocentric thinking 70 years ago. Oh, brother this, sister this. This is not the way early colonists looked at it. He didn't look at Kesar as a brother because he wasn't his brother. He looked at him as product. There was no we as black people. That didn't exist. Anthony Johnson is winning in court. His wife goes to court and she's tax exempt. Who the hell are these people? How come they have this legal status? Because they're not considered black. Anthony Johnson is not considered black. His wife is not considered black legally. Remember, it said they were respected for their work. Respected by who? Other Englishmen. You know how much 250 acres is? That is a lot of land. And then their children have 550 acres. They are colonists. These people are what you would consider the black celebrities now that all these niggas be worshiping like y'all the same. And you not. And you're not. Every day, there is content creators talking about the comings and goings of these celebrities. These celebrities do not have the same status as you. They are not your people. When you see them win and you take pride in it, why? Why? Do you notice when they're having conversations, they talk to you about relationships? But they don't talk about money. They don't talk about business. They don't break down to you how a 360 contract works in music. They don't talk about how you get paid off a movie, what kind of deals to sign in terms of licensing. They don't talk to you about name and likeness. They keep affluence away from you. But what do they give you? They give you what black resonates with: entertainment. As long as Diddy has been on camera, have you ever learned finances from him? What does he do when the camera's in front of you? He dances. Now, this is a person that is doing deals with alcohol companies, clothing companies. This is a corporate individual. Are you more well informed because of him being in corporate? When he gets on a Breakfast Club, he says things like this: "You're not going to outwork me. You don't hustle, you don't eat. You don't hustle, you don't eat." But this individual does licensing. This individual understands capitalism. Does he talk to you about that? Does your favorite celebrity talk to you about that? How does Ari Fletcher make money? How does her monetization work on social media? Does she talk to you about that? No, she doesn't. But what she does do is show you a new car that she gets. Does your favorite content creator talk to you and show you how they make money? No, they don't. What do they talk about? Relationships. And when they're beefing, they put their drama online and you choose a side. And when they're going through colorism issues, they bring it to the public square and make you choose a side, and you have sympathy for them because you think as a black woman, that's your sister. But why ain't your sister talk to you about business? She talks to you about no money. How does Lori Harvey make money? Are they getting paid off sponsorships and endorsements? Are they getting paid to post for other businesses and creators? Do you know the business model of the Shade Room? Shade Room got 29 million people there. How come they only show you celebrity? This is a place where so-called black people all come together and congregate. Why is it never about business? How come you don't walk away with a firmer understanding of credit and business and how the American structure works and how to borrow against your life insurance policy and what an annuity is and what is a Roth 401a and a Roth IRA? What is estate planning? How, how come you never walk away with anything you can use, but you are entertained? There's a reason for that. Because when you identify with blackness, the code that's baked into it keeps you in a frequency that only resonates with entertainment. That is the religion of modern blacks. Entertainment. If you can't entertain, you can't pop. You can't blow. You have to entertain. Kevin Samuels was entertainment. You don't remember the sound effects? Big Shirley and all that? That was entertainment. These podcasts are entertainment. Pop the Balloon is entertainment. And it draws huge crowds. Why? Because remember what Immanuel Kant said, that the Negro cannot govern himself, right? This is the food of the Negro. If Anthony Johnson was living, he would not be watching that. He would look at you and me as a means to an end to get some fucking money. He doesn't see me as a brother. There is no pro-blackness. That is a finesse that Umar is doing. I'm sorry. There is no we, people. That FBA conversation, it doesn't come with no loans for no businesses. It doesn't. Tariq Nasheed is rich. What does he talk to you about? Suspect the white supremacist. Do you notice that all the niggas with money don't tell you how to get none of it? You notice that? How they're making sales. How what terminals are they using? Are they using QuickBooks? Are they using Stripe? Are they taking out loans? You don't know. And if you think for 1 second that social justice narratives is not entertainment, it is. Arguments about who's a tether and who's not, that is entertainment. And you walk away feeling like you have some kind of community with other FBAs. Really? How come you ain't start a business with another FBA person? What's the purpose of being FBA? What comes with it? Ain't no networking going on, right? What's the purpose of the reparations rally when you leave there, none of the people do shit together? And remember, ain't gonna be no reparations because black in the eyes of the law does not mean what we think it means. You cannot give reparations to a legally dead people. You understand? You can't get reparations if you are legally dead. Only nations get reparations. It's called the Navajo Nation, the Seminole Nation. Israel is a nation. When we talk about these other groups getting reparations, these aren't individual people, they are nations. Black is not a nation, it is a legal classification, and it's dead socially. So you see, John Kesar becomes a slave for life, and he didn't even break the law. But Anthony Johnson didn't understand that this is going to backfire greatly. Kesar through Kesar. Though Kesar was the first person who was declared an enslaved person in a civil case, there were both black and white indentured servants sentenced to life servitude before him. Many historians describe indentured servant John Punch, remember we talked about him, as the first documented slave or slave for life in America as a punishment for escaping his captors in 1640. It is considered one of the first legal cases to make a racial distinction between black and white indentured servants. And finishing up, the Kesar lawsuit demonstrated the culture and mentality of planters in the mid 17th century. So some of you might be saying that was wrong for Anthony Johnson to enslave his own race. He did not look at Kesar as his race. It wasn't none of that thinking. And honestly, he slaved Kesar for natural life like this because Kesar, I don't have any evidence of it, but how the story and the narratives are, Kesar wasn't Christian. Because remember, you could not do that to a Christian, right? So the Kesar lawsuit demonstrates the culturally and mentality of planters in the mid 17th century. Individuals made assumptions about the society of Northampton County and their place in it. According to historian T.H. Bren and Stephanie Enns, Kesar believed he could form a stronger relationship with his patron, Robert Parker, than Anthony Johnson had developed over the years with his patron. Kesar considered the dispute to be a matter of patron-client relationship, and his wrongful assumption resulted in his losing his case in court and having ruling against him. Johnson knew that the local justice shared his fundamental belief in the sanctity of property. The judge sided with Johnson, although in future legal cases, race played a more prominent role. The Kesar lawsuit was an example of how difficult it was for Africans who were indentured servants to prevent being reduced to slavery. Most Africans could not read and had almost no knowledge of the English language. Planters found it easy to force them into slavery by refusing to acknowledge the completion of their indentured contracts. This is what happened to Johnson versus Parker. Although two white planters confirmed that Kesar had completed his indentured contract with Johnson, the court still ruled in Johnson's favor. Let's go back to see what Johnson looked like. So understand something. This man right here is winning in court versus who we would classify now as white men. His wife is tax exempt. He has 250 acres of land. His family, his sons have 550 acres of land. This man is balling out of control. And the courts are ruling in his favor. And his neighbors, who are European planters, this is the elite, they respect this man. Why? Because later his family are stripped of all this shit. What happened? What happened later? Right? Something happened. Something caused the downfall of these African planters and the upward mobility of so-called blacks in America. Now understand, when we're saying black and white, this terminology was not used at this time. You were known by where you were from, but most importantly, you were known by your religious status. First, it was the status of your religion. Then it became the status of this your new category, which is race. Okay. Anthony Johnson's family winds up losing that land because the elites did something in Virginia that we are experiencing now. There was an important moment in history, and that important moment is called Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon led a rebellion with indentured servants and Africans against their masters. This event right here changes everything. Now, prior to this, it was the religious status of a person. Okay? So Africans weren't considered Christian. So they can be handled differently than Europeans. But once the African became Christian, it had the ability to change its status. Bacon's rebellion changes everything. So this is how the elite thinks. So when we say that, yeah, we got all this from the slave master, we did not get our behavior from a slave master. We got our behavior from an overseer. If we thought like a slave master, we would not be complaining about rent. We wouldn't be complaining about police brutality. We wouldn't be complaining about colorism. We wouldn't be complaining about all the ills in the world, because thinking like a slave master is thinking business minded. Thinking like an overseer, you get the negative behavior and the habits of the person who's overseeing that plantation, who was most likely poor Irish, poor Polish, somebody with limited education. And we have that behavior. Don't have the behavior of the master. Because let me tell you how masters think. After Bacon's rebellion, something happens. There's a reason why all of a sudden Anthony Johnson, who was an elite, considered an elite, when he dies, his family's status changes. What happens during Bacon's rebellion? Let's see. Take this down for a sec. What happens during Bacon's rebellion, y'all? Bacon's rebellion makes war on native tribes for their land, begins looting wealthy white plantations as well. Jamestown is burned. But Bacon does not just do this with European indentured servants. Bacon does this with enslaved Africans and indentured servants, right? The difference between the indentured and the slave is the indentured has a contract. And once the contract is over, they become free. The slave, that's their condition for life. And they oftentimes got it by committing a crime. Okay? So you have what we would call whites and blacks fighting together. I want to also say that those people that are saying they are originally native, you're going to bump into some issues, because the Buffalo Soldier, Buffalo Soldier, dreadlock Rasta, the Buffalo Soldier, what they don't tell you, and I found this out at the Native American History Museum at Washington, D.C., they called him Buffalo Soldier because he murdered the buffalo. Because the Buffalo Soldier was part of the army and it helped Western expansion. So when Claude Anderson says, oh, the Cherokee, Native Americans were slaving black people, slaving Africans, well, niggas was doing shit too. In Jamestown, during the Bacon's Rebellion, Africans and indentured Africans, African slaves and indentured Africans helped European indentured and slaves conquer Native American land. So there's going to be an issue with we're the original natives. Okay, well, who were the people during Bacon's Rebellion helping Francis Bacon? And who were the Buffalo Soldiers? If we are the original natives, this is the new movement now. It's a movement every 5 years now, right? If we're saying that we're not African and we were always here, well, who were those people that were buffalo soldiers? Were they originally natives that joined the army? Who were these people that was helping during the Bacon Revolution go against indigenous people? What dark-skinned people were they? You're gonna have to deal with that. Let me run that back to you. There is this growing movement of people saying they are the original peoples of the Americas and they do not come by way of this diaspora. Cool. My question to you, though, is who were those buffalo soldiers that were helping the army expand west? Because they were considered enemies of those tribes because they killed the buffalo. Also, who were the people fighting with Francis Bacon against natives? Who were they? Y'all got to figure that out. Y'all got to figure that out. Are you the true native? And these Africans were joining the army to become buffalo soldiers to fight against your people? Are you the true native? And these Africans were part of the Bacon's rebellion and they were fighting against indigenous peoples of America? You're going to have to figure that out because you're not going to be allowed to continue to say that you are the original American and you didn't come over here from no slave boats. Fine. If that's the case, then you're saying that you're native to America and the African joined the army and helped the white man fight against your peoples. If you're from the Virginia, Maryland, East Coast, you're saying that you belong to tribes and blacks, right? Fought against you and your peoples. Because we're talking about reclassification. So you got to figure that out, right? You got to figure that out. Bacon's rebellion. White landowners were terrified to see black and poor white workers united in any cause. In 1676, Nathaniel Bacon led a rebellion of black and white colonists against the governor of Virginia, William Berkeley. They demanded that Berkeley open up a new land for settlements, end Native American raids, and regulate the abuse of servants. Their short-lived rebellion resulted in the government limiting European indentured servitude. The scales tipped. Europeans gained new rights and Africans lost their freedom. Social conflict between the classes. This is Bacon Rebellion. Grandees needed permanent labor force to cut down on class conflict. Former indentured servants are now discontented. Turns into a race conflict. Now low class has someone below them. Now low class has someone below them. I'll get into that in a second. The aftermath. The ruling class of Virginia, alarmed by the natural alliance of slaves and servants during the rebellion, results in harsh laws against any contact between black slaves and white servants. Plantation owners increase the importation of slaves. Now, slavery in the colonies booms. Why? Because now black is now a legal status. It's complete. The elite do not want any rebellions going on anymore. They see these indentured servants fighting together. They have to make sure this doesn't happen again. See, this is thinking like a master. So what they do is they reclassify white or what European, and they reclassify African. The African is no longer just African. He's now black. And the European is white. And they are legal status. And now this indentured servant that was once fighting with this African now has a class distinction between the two. We are not the same. You are under me. That's Bacon's Rebellion. That's the reason why Anthony Johnson family lost their land, because now black becomes an actual legal category in law. And what they created from it was a narrative that anyone black is naturally designed for slavery. Prior to that, it was religion. Now it's your skin tone. We are still experiencing the fallout from Bacon's Rebellion. And guess what? Look what happens. Slavery in Virginia goes through the roof. Because now you have this new term for black as a legal status. Guess what, too? Those natives that they were once fighting against before, call them black too. Call them black. Because as long as I paste black on you, I change your status. So now, go back to the conversation I was having before. So now you have Choctaw, you have Seminole, you have Potawatomi, you have Navajo, you have Apache, you have Cherokee, you have these tribes in America who's also going to be called black. They also now become slaves. So now here's where the African and the native intersect, right? Because of language. The native is called Negro. They're called black. And with that terminology comes a legal status. Look how it booms. What boomed? It's not that people were imported. The people that were here with red copper skin tone are also pulled into this new classification called black. So, if I was alive at the time, my shirt is a black shirt, but my skin is not that. So, if I was alive at the time and I belonged to the Seminole, guess what I would be called? Negro. Guess what I would be called? Black. This is one of the ways that slave population in the South that was 4 million, that's how. You think that shit just popped up and people were being imported? You have this language happening. Remember, this conversation is about language, and you see the power of it. Language is now creating a new legal status for people that they didn't say they were. So if I was alive at that particular time, my skin is not the color of this shirt, but black is a legal status for a human. However, a black shirt is not a legal status, right? This black stapler has no legal status, but a black human does. A black stapler is not against the law. A black shirt is not against the law, but the black classification is against the law and designed and made for slavery. And here comes all the scientific racism, because you need to justify this shit. See the power of language? How people get called something, and in being called something, they lose their entire identity. They lose their humanity. They lose their relationship to their environment. Why do you think when the police are in high pursuit, even if they know your name, you get called a suspect? See, because if I call you by your name, that's associated with a mother and a father and a community and a school and a job. But if I call you a suspect, You lose that. So if something happens to you, the public doesn't feel anything because they didn't humanize you, right? When you hear about a insurgent or when someone is called a terrorist, guess what a terrorist doesn't have? A nation, a family. So whatever happens to that individual, the people are like, well, it was a terrorist anyway. That's the power of language. That is the power of belief, right? That Anthony Johnson kind of backfired on him, right? Because when he's slave John Kesar, who on record his indentured servitude was over 7 years prior, Anthony Johnson did him dirty, and the courts ruled in his favor. But later, what happened? That land that Anthony Johnson had was stripped because now his bloodline are being called black. We really argue about who's black and who's not. But in law, black is not positive. White is a status. So when we say white privilege, that is not a look, it is a status. Black is a status. If you think about a pyramid, black, the status of black comes here. Now, you can have rich celebrities like Anthony Johnson, right? And it's going to be a few at the top. And they are celebrated and idolized. And they are a buffer between the ruling class, right? I'm sorry, but the fraternity men and women are a buffer to the ruling class. Steve Coakley taught us about that many moons ago. The Black Greeks are a buffer to the ruling class. You'll never have a revolution in the country. You'll never tear down structures in the country like you think with your social justice when your politicians belong to fraternities, when your politicians belong to sororities, Q and all that, Q dogs and all that shit, which is roots in masonry, right? That is a buffer class that keeps the majority of the blacks at the bottom. At the bottom. Right? We live through our fraternity men and women because they are an example of what happens when you work hard, right? They're an example of what happens when you work hard and you keep your head down. You can pull yourself up by the bootstraps. They're always Christian too, ain't they? Now we already looked at the history of Christianity in the colonies. The Black Greek, the Black sorority woman, are they ever any other religion? They're always Christian, right? Which play the game. Play the game. But you got to see language and status and how it works, right? Language, status, how it works. On this one, what we can see is just kind of a timeline of slavery in America, right? So, 1619, White Lion captured 20 enslaved Africans in a battle with the Spanish ship. They landed in Jamestown, Virginia, for repairs for the battle, for food and supplies. The Dutch traded the enslaved Africans to the colonists as indentured servants. Let me stop right there. When they talk about the 1619 project, when they talk about we was here 400 years ago, why do we consider us the 20 people? We have this weird in grouping thing where if we see anybody brown, we be like, that's we. In 1619, the White Lion captured 20 enslaved Africans in a battle with a Spanish ship. They landed at Jamestown, Virginia, for repairs for battle, for food and supplies. The Dutch traded the enslaved Africans to the colonists as indentured servants. If 20 Africans are here, right? Why do we say we? That's your family? And you can't say, oh, that's my brothers. That's not true, because these Africans didn't see themselves as the same people. So why do we claim we've been in America for 400 years? Where's that coming from? Right? These talking points run into a wall when you actually peel them back. Because those 20, you're saying that's your we, right? The Great Migration, 1618 to 1623, was a period where the population grew from 450 to 4,000. However, there was also an extremely mortality rate due to disease, malnutrition, and war with Indians. Due to the high mortality rate, the colonies were in dire need of laborers. Indentured servants. Indentured servants are laborers who are under a contract with their masters to serve their master for a period of time. In exchange for being servants, they receive shelter, food, passage across seas, and accommodation. Indentured servants in America. In colonial America, indentured slaves did not only consist of Africans, but a large majority of them were Irish, Scottish, English, and Germans who were brought over from Europe and were paying their debt for their passage overseas. Remember Anthony Johnson? I just mentioned him. Anthony Johnson was one of the first African Americans. Okay, here's the thing about language. Sometimes we take language and push it back to the past. There was no such thing as an African American. But when you're reading this, you'll think that's what he was. Anthony Johnson was one of the first African Americans to have finished his services as an indentured servant and became a landowner on the Eastern Shore and a slave owner himself. Remember Bacon's Rebellion? I just read this, right? So you can see a timeline too, right? Although indentured servants became free and obtained their own land, they were given land that no one wanted. This discrimination led to Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was the first rebellion in colonial America. The rebellion was a protest against Sir William Berkeley, governors of Virginia. Okay. Gradual change in what? In status. There was a gradual change in the status of African Americans. Again, they're using a term that was not used. So let's change that. There was a gradual change in the status of Africans, I'll even say natives, from indentured servants to chattel slaves. In 1640 in Virginia, the Virginia courts had sentenced one of the first Black indentured servants to slavery. That was John Punch. Remember, John Punch was the one that ran away and he was sentenced to life. Running away was considered a crime. Now, John Kesar. In 1654, John Kesar became the first legal slave in America. Anthony Johnson, who I just read before, previously an African indentured slave, claimed John Kesar as his slave. The Northampton County rule against Kesar had declared him proprietor for life by Anthony Johnson. Since Africans were not English, they were not covered by common law. John Punch is sentenced to life for running away, not because he's so-called Black. He committed a crime. He ran away. He's sentenced to life. Then Anthony Johnson, who was an African, got himself free and enslaved John Kesar for life. The courts ruled in his favor. In 1650, look at the change though, right? Look, watch the change. 1650, Negroes are not allowed arms and ammunition. 1662, a child's status, free or slave, depends on his mother's status. I'll go back to that in a sec. 1667, baptism does not alter the condition to the persons as to his bondage or freedom. 1682, all servants are not Christian at the time of their purchase by some Christian. 1705, all servants imported and brought into the country who was not Christian in their native country shall be a slave. So let me go back to my believers again. All servants and brought into the country who were not Christian in their native country shall be account and be slaves. Before there was ever a white supremacy, there was religious supremacy. And the slavery that many of people you call your ancestors, the reason for their slavery, I said this in the beginning, was because of their religious status. The religious status now changed into a legal status called Negro, Black, or Colored. Let's go back to 1662 because this is important. A child's status, free or slave, depends on the mother's status. That is super important because if the mother is a slave, it does not matter if the father is free or not. If the mother is a slave, then the child is a slave. Let me say this and trigger through it. It is important to keep women who identify as FBA or Black or colored extremely dumb. Because if they are, then that's what their children will be. I don't care how that sounds. You are not popping, sis, if your status is that of a slave because you transfer that to your babies. How the colonies go, it's not the father status, it's your status. So understand, how you're showing up, that's how your babies show up. So it's important to drain the mind of the woman that identifies as Black or brown. And how they do it now is to make the Black woman a corporate slave, a consumer for life. Because you got to pull the concepts into now. If you can make mama consumer minded, then the baby will be consumer minded. Does not matter what the status is of the father. So when I seen my mom with money in her hand, it was like she was allergic to it because she had to get rid of that shit. She had to go to Rent a Center and get herself some furniture, put herself in debt. I seen this woman run through money so quickly. She felt it was a feeling that spending the money gave her, right? And she passed that to me, right? Regardless of what my daddy is on. Remember, 1662, a child's status, free or slave, depends on the mother status. Let me flip that around. To the men that are complaining about single moms, to the men that are complaining about single moms and how these single moms are handling these children, where are you? Right? Where are you? You don't have a knowledge of yourself. Right? Do you know what you're up against? Do you know what's on the books? Right? If the mother status becomes the child status, right? And you, a dude who has this seed, look at the status of the woman. Why would you have a baby with her? Her status becomes her child status. Why would you have a baby with her? If you are a FBA man and you're interested in FBA woman, black woman, sir, you have to change the status of the woman. Because when you change the status of the woman, you change the baby status. And it's not money that changes their status, it's knowledge of themselves that change the status. If you are a dude and you're interested in a woman and you don't show up with no books in your hand, no teaching in your hand, no academia in your hand, no different ways to help shape this woman to look at the world, leave her alone. Because based off what's on the books in American history, her status is that child status, and they put things in place to make sure that is the case. You cannot show up with dick. If you're not showing up, helping her form new ideals about herself, about the world, if you're not putting her on game, if you're not coming with knowledge, leave her alone, because the child don't get your status. It gets her status. You see men all the time. Yeah, man, shit, man, he over there with his mom, man. Man, I'm telling you, man, that's the mom, man. Yo, shit. And what do the man say? I'll go make a new family. Yeah, man, she over there with his mom, man. His mom be putting stuff in his head, man. That's what the dude say, right? That's your bad, right? Okay. So we see the Virginia colony, how language is shaping this thing. We also been able to prove that these people that are coming from West Africa, I can't speak on Ethiopia. I'm only talking West Africa. Africa is a huge continent. The people from West Africa were not Christian. They are converts. A lot of times converted because of violence. A lot of times converted because of survival. And look up at the status. If mom is a Christian, son is a Christian. We don't give a damn about daddy. So it's important to pump the religion into the woman. Who is the hardest Christian in America that go hard for the Bible? Black woman. She don't even got to read it. The black woman is a believer in Jesus like no other. And guess what that does? The babies are also a believer now. And their babies are also a believer now, right? And those children have a way of looking at the world. And what's that? The way that they look at the world is through the perspective of a colonist. So those children will grow up and judge other people on colonist metrics. It's important for niggas to leave these women alone if you are not coming with the sword of information. If you're not coming to open her eyes to the world, leave her alone. And if you're a real teacher, you will teach a woman in a way that she don't need you anymore. She wants you. You teach her in a way that she's so empowered with knowledge that she may not even want to be in a relationship with you because the journey has took her on a different path. If you are a true teacher and you are right and exact, you'll never be in your baby feelings because doing the work of personal development is more important than your ego. So you see that right there, right? A quick history of how status was changing. Now, I've said many times in this bill that before it was ever a white supremacy, it was religious supremacy. Okay? Now, what these Europeans are moving off of, so we're going a little from the past, then back and forth, right? But what they're moving off of was set in place before that. Now, remember, Anthony Johnson, he was from Portuguese Angola. Why would a part of Africa be called Portuguese? Something happened that it's called the doctrine of discovery. Right now, what you're looking at 1452, 1455, 1493, these are papal bulls, okay? Religious legal documents. These documents allow for the subjugation of the world. Okay? Before there was ever white supremacy, there was religious supremacy. Okay? All right. Screenshot this so you can read them yourself. What is the doctrine of discovery? In 1454, Pope Nicholas issues papal bull Romanus Pontifex, authorizing the Portuguese king to capture, vanquish, and subdue enemies of Christ, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This was the first of the papal bulls of discovery ordered by the infallible pope to enslave, spoliate, and subjugate because non-Christians were heathens. Further proof that there was no Christianity in South America, there was no Christianity in Americas, and I even question the Coptic church in Africa simply because the way that the European handled all these people, they handled them as enemies of Christ. They did not go to their areas and recognize them as Christians. Christian was only recognized as a European religion. Anybody non-European, it is looked at as you are borrowing the faith. They are doing you a favor for your salvation because your intrinsic nature is a heathen. Your belief in Christianity has a historical context. You cannot turn your intellect off just because you like Yolanda Adams. I do too. When I hear the song and ask me for some guidance, especially today when my world seems so cloudy, that's my shit. That don't change the history though. The history. What was that? Kirk Franklin, God's prophet. I come to the valley and I've been through the flood. I've been broke into pieces. I grew up in it. I know the songs. Fred Hampton, John P. Key, Mississippi Mass, what? Melodies from heaven rain down on me. Rance Allen. I know all that shit. Our connection to it is not an intellectual connection. Our connection to the religion is an emotional connection. That's what the dancing is for. That's what the crying is for. That's what the screaming is for. We are trying to scream out the trauma out of us. We are trying to scream the poverty out of us, right? But the emotional connection I have with these songs does not change the fact that the religion was used as an act of war. Okay? This is one of the first edicts, papal bulls. 1455. Where therefore weighing all and singular the premises with due meditation, and noting that since we have formerly by other letters of ours granted among other things free and ample faculty to the aforesaid King Alfonso to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. Where did this come from? The Pope. What people did this happen to? Melanated people of the world. Conquest was not happening because of your skin. It was happening because of you weren't Christian. That you were considered enemies of Christ. Your ancestors' spirituality, Ifa, Oshun, that was an enemy of Christ. Having female deities, that was an enemy of Christ. The impact of the doctrine on indigenous peoples. 1492, Columbus enslaves the Arawak people, commits genocide, and their total extinction by 1555. That's not true. There's Taino and Arawaks that still exist. Christopher Columbus initiates the slave trade in Africa, 1500s. 500-year war against the First Nations people of America, Canada, genocide over 100 million native peoples. Australia suffered lost generations and the genocide of 20 million through extermination. Okay. Remember, I said in the beginning, this is about language and belief. Those people believed when they seen people that looked like this. Some people were tall, short. Some people had gold on all them. Some people had plates in their lips, bones in their bones in their noses. Some people had tribal scar. They came in contact with all these old people from around the world, and through their lens, they genuinely thought, based on their belief, that these people were subhuman. When they looked at their practices spiritually, when they looked at their reverence for nature, most importantly, when they looked at that these melanated people from Africa, South America, New Guinea, Australia, that they had the female aspect in their pantheons of gods. That was a hell no. They really thought these people, something was wrong with them. What they were coming to find out, how come the men are not on top of the women? In Europe, that's how they see the world. The woman is the property of the man. When they conquered other cultures, other groups of people, that was placed on them. So even when we are arguing back and forth about submissive woman, understand that is from the perspective of a conquered person. Men were not over women. Women were not over men. There was a balance, and nature, the land, the water, the fire, the wind was over them, right? So when the Europeans were coming in, the missionaries, what they taught them in their Judeo-Christianity is that the man over you. So now look at this. Look at the incentive to be Catholic and Christian, even Muslim. The same way as the European indentured servant found a different status because now you put black under him. So now it's like, yeah, I got something to rule over. That's what happened to men. The conqueror gave men that look like me a status over the woman. So listen, I'm going to conquer you, but in conquering you, you know that bitch that you've been mad at for all the time? She been in your ear, yap, 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 here. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you a gun. And instead of fighting me, fight her. Because in this book, she is the reason why we're even enslaving you. Because it's original sin and we're doing you a favor. You see what belief and status does? You see how reclassification can change the way a person looks? You have people that was existing hundreds of thousands of years with no problem. This outsider comes in and says, how come you ain't over that bitch? And by the time this outsider leaves, these people lost their land, they lost their entire way of life, they lost their diet, and what was left was a gender hierarchy. So when we are going back and forth on podcasts and men this and women this, understand the lens that you're looking at. The Judeo-Christian framework is not a natural global framework to look at family, to look at the world. This is the weapon of the conqueror. It's not my opinion. Huh. People's been existing, been living, thriving, right? Of course they have problems. They're human, right? But this new group of people come to you and they scramble your entire way of life because of a belief that they have. And we have taken on the belief. So now, if the woman in our group does not openly want to reduce herself to property status for us, be our helpmeet, she's discarded. She don't want to be no Chad wife, right? And then the woman in the group looks at the man and says, why you ain't leading me? You're not a leader. I should be able to do nothing and you take care of all this shit. So even the woman in the group buys into the shit. How come you ain't leading me? I want to be able to turn my mind off like these kids and you do everything. Both sides are, it's a crazy dynamic. Both sides are like this based on the metric of what the conqueror said to do. You're not a high value man. You're not a submissive woman. All these are statuses, right, of a European metric. And again, you can follow it. That's fine. But you must disconnect yourself from saying anything about ancestors. And when you're talking, you're a traditional woman, you're a traditional man, what traditions are you talking about? Colonial traditions or indigenous traditions? Because it is a colonial tradition for a man and woman to walk down the aisle and be married. That is a colonial tradition. It is a colonial tradition to have a biblical wedding. It is a colonial tradition to he that find a wife findeth a good thing. Why? Why does he find a wife findeth a good thing? Because a wife was a domestic servant. So if you can find somebody to do that shit for you, to be under you, that is a good thing. Language. Language. Right? Language. And we repeat it because let's admit we are the conquered and we are in an empire and we take on the behavior of the empire. So all these podcast talking points are talking points of empire. So it work a little something like this. Spanish Empire, French Empire, British Empire, Portuguese Empire. All these nations, these four nations, four, change the status of a billion people. Yes, with a B, through their conquest and through their empire. We see the world through these four nations' viewpoint. Spanish, French, British, and the Portuguese. Right here is the Spanish Empire. How was this Spanish Empire able to do this? Remember, they got the right from the Pope. Now, I want you to look at everywhere in orange. Everywhere in orange in the Western Hemisphere, there are millions of people and they are very old. And you know the sad thing, what these empires did? The only origin story we know is the Big Bang. It's either a biblical story with the Adam and Eve story, or it's a Big Bang story. And we only know evolution through the European perspective. We don't know any indigenous origin stories. And we look at their origin stories as superstition and we disrespect them. We know nothing about these. And another thing, if you're on the movement claiming that your people are indigenous to America, you're native, you only want that on some leverage shit because you don't want to be African no more. If you're truly a native, so what is the way you handle a cough? If you're truly native, why do you get married like a colonist? If you're truly native, what is the gender dynamic of that said native group that you're claiming you are? If you're truly native, how come you don't have a relationship to nature? The native had a respect for land. The native had a respect for water. The native had a respect for the sun. The native had a respect for the elements. The native named their children things that meant something. You can't just say that you are native to America without tying it to a behavior. Okay, what do you do? Show me. What is your relationship to rocks? Who's your shaman? Who's your medicine man? What is the rites of passage for boys and girls when they become a certain age? What about rain dancing? Because understand, when you say that you're the natives of these lands, the colonists called these people pagan. Okay? So all the spirituality that you're going to embrace was considered devil worship. Don't just try to take the identity for you. We was already here. Okay, what's the behavior of the people already here? Did your people come through the Bering Strait? How did they get here? Did your people, what happened with your people and the colon and the Younger Dryas? Are you part of the Clovis culture? When you start to talk that shit, you better be careful, because it's people that's going to speak it back to you, and there's people that claim native that feel like you're trying to steal their history. Oh yeah, the Olmecs, that's us too. We do a lot of that. Oh, that's us. Oh, that's me. That's me. That's me. Really? Prove it. Build a structure now. Because many of these native cultures, even though small, still practice the way of life. How are you claiming to be Seminole and Choctaw, but at the same time you're a Christian? How does that work? Okay, so what you're looking at is the Spanish Empire, all through Mexico and the Southwest. Like I'm in Arizona, right? You see all through the Caribbean, all through South America, right? Chile, Ecuador, Panama. This is why you have people named Jorge. This is why you have people named Maria. This is why you have people named Juan. This is why they speak Spanish. And think about this: for hundreds of millions of people to speak Spanish, do you know what kind of ethnic cleansing through sex was happening? We're talking about millions of people that were bred out. How does millions of people have the name Juan, Hector, Maria, Jorge? That is Spanish. Enrique, Vasquez. And if they looked at you or us and them as enemies of Christ, think about their sexual urges, right? Many of these people were virgins in Europe. They didn't have access to women, okay? And they're far away from home. Think about the sexual exploits of these individuals, man. They bred out an entire people. The Mochica don't even know who they are. The Aztec and Mayan don't even know who they are. And guess what? You got the same conflict all in El Salvador, all through Mexico. You got northerners and southerners beefing, MS-13 beefing. And guess what the root of their shit is, though? Spanish. All through language, changing the status of millions of people. This is the Portuguese. All that purple is the spread of Portuguese culture. But guess what comes with them? Guess what comes with them? Guess what comes with them? Religion. So in the West, you have indigenous Brazilians now becoming Portuguese, now becoming Catholic, and their way of life is demonized. Their status is changing. They are now called preto, which is black. You have the Portuguese all through the west of Africa, going to the southern tip. The Dutch also go to South Africa. These are settler colonies. They changed the status of the people. They went to India. They went all over the world with the ideal of the doctrine of discovery, that they had a legal right to do this to all the enemies of Christ. So that's the Portuguese. Look at the French. Look at West Africa. Many West Africans speak French. Look at Madagascar. The French also colonized the Midwest. St. Louis. St. Louis, that's French. When you talk about white supremacy, you do know what it is? Having your last name is white supremacy. If that's what you believe. But it's actually a myth because it's based on belief. These people are driven by something in their mind. Look at this. Everywhere in blue, this was French. They changed the people's culture, right? No matter what we think we are European. We're European. The way we marry, the way we look at the world, our approach to medicine, our approach to science. This is empire, okay? Then you have the British Empire, which is red. Look at this. Look at the landmass. After the colonies are formed, then we have Western expansion, right? So there is no America in the 16th and 1700s. Oregon is not America. California is not America. You have Western expansion, these land grabs, the Louisiana Purchase. You have all these wars, Spanish-American War, French-American War. You have all these wars and these land grabs. The western part of America doesn't become that until we invade the West. You have Lewis and Clark who are basically mapping out the West. And guess what? The Buffalo Soldiers helped Western expansion. Okay. But look at British, all in Africa. Look at Australia. The same thing happened. Settler colonies. India, settler colonies, where the people come there, change the culture of the people there. Through disease, through violence, through torture, everything. This is settler colonies. Okay, so this is how America would have looked in the 1700s. The East Coast is the colonies. That's British. Okay, the blue is French. Going all the way up to Canada in the purple is French. Florida is Spanish. Okay, and New Mexico, parts of Texas, Arizona is Spanish. So to give you a better look at how it looked, America was divided up a couple ways. So when we say America's always been, we're pushing modern language into the past as if it was like that. It wasn't. Okay. But what I really want you to think about, though, is there are people all through this landmass, and their lifestyle is changed because of language and belief. Their reality has been totally changed because another culture's belief system and another culture's language. Now, many of us have heard Columbus discovered, the conquistador discovered, the Portuguese and the English discovered unclaimed lands. And we'd be like, how can you discover people that's already there? And you have a good point. The problem is language. What you think discover is not discovered. So according to the church, discover meant something different. In law, what is discover? The formal process that a party in a lawsuit uses to obtain information and evidence from another party in that lawsuit. When the conquistadors are going to these lands, there is no other Christian nation. Remember, that was the rule. if they found any other Christians, then they couldn't take the land. So when it says Columbus discovered, he did. He discovered non-Christian kingdoms. And since they were not Christian, he was able to subjugate them. The Portuguese found non-Christian kingdoms and they were able to subjugate. Most discovery is written in some form, written in some of which we call, most discovery is in writing, some of which we call cover today. Guess what? The melanated peoples were oral people. They wasn't writing things down. It was going from mouth to ear. So when you destroy the elders or you destroy a certain part of their culture, it's very difficult to pass down their history because it's not written. Meanwhile, and here's another thing, what makes America gangster is paperwork. The system is paperwork. That paperwork is what runs the world. What classifies us African American is papers. What classified us as black is papers. What classified us as Christian was papers. We are a slave to a page in their rhyme book. They came with guns, disease, and papers. Okay. Discovery. Interrogation, request for production of documents, request for admission, subpoenas, depositions. The indigenous people didn't know what the hell this was. They're not part of English common law. They're not part of canon law from Spain and Portugal. They don't know what this is. And guess what? Columbus and Cortez and De Santo are speaking empire to them, and the native don't know. Many of the native meet them with friendship. But in their mind, they're about to destroy these people because they were under a law that said if there are no Christian nations here, you have a right to subjugate, you have a right to subdue, you have a right to colonize and conquer. They're going off something called legalese. Look at the power of language. The reason why we have to hire lawyers is because they speak legalese. We lawyers cannot write plain English. We use 8 words to say what we will be said in 2. We use old arcane phrases to express common ideals. Look at your contracts. That's what a lawyer does. They know how to read legalese. Seeking to be precise, we become redundant. Seeking to be cautious, we become verbose. Our sentence twists on phrase within clause, glazing the eyes and numbing the minds of our readers. The result is a writing style that is wordy, unclear, pompous, and dull. That is what legalese is. Remember, I said this is about words changing reality. Words are worlds. If a people conquers you and they pull you into this language, it does not matter what you believe. You are now a slave to the rhyme book. I am a slave to the rhyme book. Here, there, and where words. This is legalese. Words like hereof, thereof, wherefore of. The derivatives ending in at, in, after, before, with, by, above, on, upon are not often used in ordinary English. They are used in legal English, mainly to avoid repetition of names of things in the document. For example, the parties hereto, and instead of the parties to this contract, or the provisions contained hereafter, instead of the provisions contained to later on this contract. I know all of you have seen this. Like, what the hell? It turned into another language. Now you understand how you can become black, how you can become African American. You see the power of language, right? How you can become indigenous and now you're a paper slave, right? Slaved by the government through terms and titles: Negro, black, colored, this and that. This is all legalese. It's so powerful that, check it out. Person. A person can be human beings. Persons, natural or artificial bodies, incorporate corporations, sole subjects of the crown. A corporation has the natural rights of a person. You know, when we become LLCs and S corps and corporations, a sole proprietor is the individual, right? When you start to go into LLCs, S corps, corporations, C corps, you get to hide behind the business. When you get sued, your business is getting sued, right? This person is getting sued. Corporations, real estate, holding companies, things can make purchases as if it's a real guy. You can set up fictitious organizations and it operates as a person. Listen, man, this is magic. Late 14th century magic, art of influence or predicting events and producing marvels using hidden natural forces. Like what? Language. Also, supernatural art, especially the art of controlling the actions of spiritual or superhuman beings. Let's read that again. Especially the art of controlling the actions of spiritual or superhuman beings. How can a tribe of 6'8", 6'10" melanated men with crazy BMI, how do you bring them down? You bring them down with language. The moment they consider themselves a Christian man, it's over. The moment they consider themselves black men, it's over. The moment that they look at, no, let me not say that. Especially the art of the controlling actions. One second. Especially the art of controlling the actions of spiritual superhuman beings. Now I'm reading the etymology of the word magic. From old magic, magic, magical, from late Latin, magic, sorcery, magic, from Greek magiki, presumed to be techni, fem, magicos, magical, from magos, one of the members of the learned and priestly class, from Persian magash, which is possibly from pi root mak, to be able, have power. Question: do you not think that there are members of a learned priestly class behind this sorcery that is governing the people? Think about that for a second. It's called spelling. Spelling. Go down a bit. Magic. And priest, magician. Natural magic in the Middle Ages was that which did not involve the agency of personal spirits. It was considered more or less legitimate, not sinful, and involved much that would be explained scientifically as the manipulation of natural forces in the Middle Ages. But it's funny how voodoo is sinful. Santeria is sinful, right? Those practices that had power for these people is sinful now because of what? Language. Language. I just want to show you one more thing about language. Okay. Okay. So what we're looking at right now is something which is based on immigration, right? This is the Neutralization Act of 1790. What does it state? The Neutralization Act of 1790 states enacted what was a law of the United States Congress. This is the first time I believe the Congress meets together after they form this new thing called America. The Revolutionary War is over, right? This was a law of the United States Congress that set the first uniform rules for granting of United States citizenship by naturalization. The law limited naturalization to free white persons. Now, mind you, now we just did a whole build where you see that in the early colonies, that term was not used. Now you see it's used. This explains how all the Europeans came to America in the Homestead Act. Okay? The law limited neutralization to free white persons of good character, thus excluding Native Americans, indentured servants, enslaved peoples, free Africans, Pacific Islanders, and non Asians. This eliminated ambiguity on how to treat newcomers, given that free Black people had not been allowed citizenship at the state level in many states. Here goes this religion thing again. In reading the Neutralization Act, the courts also, let's blow this up because this is important. The courts also associated whiteness with Christianity and thus excluded Muslim immigrants from citizenship until the decision ex parte Moharis recognized citizenship for a Saudi Muslim man in 1944. Real quick, right here. In reading the Neutralization Act, the courts also associated whiteness with Christianity. I'm going to scroll down real quick right here. All right. Though the act did not specifically, I'm reading right here. Now we're reading the Neutralization Act of 1790. Though the act did not specifically preclude women from citizenship, courts absorbed the common law practice of coverture into the United States legal system. Under this practice, the physical body of a married woman, and thus any rights to her person or property, was controlled by her husband. A woman's loyalty to her husband was considered above her obligation to the state. Jurisprudence on domestic relations held that infants, enslaved people, and women should be excluded from participation in public life and conducting business because they lack discernment, the right to free will and property, and there was a need to prevent moral depravity and conflicts of loyalty. So you still want to get married? I'm just reading American documents. This is the 1790 Neutralization Act. So not only did it ban any white non-Christian from immigrating to America, right? It also enacted coverture, where a woman that is married is absorbed into her husband. She is not looked at as a citizen of the United States or this new America unless she's married. These dudes right now are fighting for this right now to go back to Coverture. This is legal shit that a woman that is married is excluded from public office, right? Conducting business because women, enslaved people, and infants lack discernment. So, for the record, when you come online and you do these videos to say, oh, I'm a submissive woman, understand what you're saying. And you can do whatever you want, right? But understand, right? When you say you're a submissive woman based on laws that were laid down is a woman that lacks discernment, right? You aren't a citizen, right? You are on the same level of an infant because you are submitting, and the man, you're absorbed into him, making he is the legal person. You are not. Status: a married woman, an enslaved person, and a child damn near had the same status. Not quite, though, right? Those that identify as white still had a better status than a slave, but it depends if they came from a poor class. So even marriage historically is a status. When a woman got married, right, she starts as a free woman. When she's married, according to coverture, she now loses personhood and she is absorbed into her husband. That's why it was important as an act of war for many Englishmen, Dutchmen, many colonists to get married to indigenous women that held noble positions, because in their law, all of her property became his. How do you think that all this land, how do you think that all these riches, art that was in Native American culture and indigenous culture, African culture, the family lost it from marriage? Because when the woman gets married, her legal status changes. Her body and everything she comes with belongs to the man. What is this based on? Language. That was our initial point. Language, the power of belief, right? Now, you got a decision to make. First of all, white supremacy don't exist. This is just a belief. It's a belief. That's all it is. But if this belief has the ability to shape the world as we know it, what will believing in yourself and your abilities do? What will your affirmations do? You have to believe in something because it's something magical about belief. Belief made individuals who came from a history of non-bathing, a history of terrible irrigation, a history of plague, a belief in this new ideal called white, civilized millions of people, and a belief in this new ideal called black, destroyed hundreds, billions of people that were living in nature for hundreds of thousands of years. And it wasn't a volcano that reduced them. It wasn't a hurricane or tornado that reduced them. It wasn't the elements that reduced their state. It was classification, language, and belief. And if they can do that, what can you do? If if I can help you with your belief, if I can help you uh, imagine yourself different in the workplace, in your relationships, how you show up, uh, scan this. Let me be your accountability partner. Let me help you with your belief in how you show up in the world. Because as we just seen, there is no force in the world more powerful than human belief. And the world that we live in is shaped by your language. So use it wisely. Body bag. Much respect to you. Even if you wish me the opposite, sooner or later, we'll all see who the prophet is.